Welcome to April's technical training meeting. Let me pull up our agenda real quick, if I can figure out how to run my computer. So on the screen, got a list of some training opportunities I'm aware of. I know we've been trying to just email out some others, but anyway, the Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational and Environmental Health or something like that, they do our lead and asbestos. Well, they do lead and asbestos. We've been using them because they're a good source. They do have an asbestos inspector training coming up in June, which as we go through our health and safety stuff today, you'll see that if your agency wanted to, you could go take that, or you could have somebody certified as an asbestos inspector. So be aware of that. Also, if your lead inspector stuff is coming due, make sure and jump on their website and get signed up for whatever class you need. RMGA is doing an education summit on April 11th. If you'll hit their website up or just look in your inbox if you get their emails. There's the couple of nationals, the national conference in Philadelphia in this month, if anybody was interested, and then also Energy Out West in May. I got an email from Energy Out West just the other day. It sounds like some of the most coveted classes are still available, and there was still a little bit of room in their hotel. So if you haven't gotten signed up, if you jump on that right away, you may still be able to get a room and stuff like that. Formerly Questar, Dominion Energy, they're doing some lunch and learn code trainings. I think it was like every Tuesday of the first or second Tuesday of the month or something, or Wednesday of the month. But basically, this April 12th, they're doing building envelope. They're going to be from 11 to 1 at Salt Lake Community College location in Sandy. If anybody wants more information, I think I sent out a flyer, or you can contact me for the flyer. But this month they're doing building envelope, next month mechanical ventilation, and then in June commercial envelope. And then I put this on here for the auditors. I am planning an auditor library setup meeting for June 4th. So I need at least one auditor from every agency to make sure that you have that on your agenda and plan on attending. And if there are multiple certified auditors at your agency, you are welcome to attend as well. Any other training opportunities that everybody should know about?
I think that pretty well covers them.
All right. I wrote this one, the cantilever thing down, but we're going to talk about that in a minute, so I'm going to skip it for right now. The peer exchange, I hope everybody's enjoying that. We've had some good feedback. I just wanted a follow-up. Yeah, go ahead.
We're here, but we're not able to hook up on the computer. I was just wondering if everybody's having that problem, or is it just us?
Anybody else having that issue where you've got audio but you can't see the screen?
Oh, I'm good.
Jesse Chambers is having a problem with his.
Okay.
Once I need.
Did anybody have a problem but they were able to get through it? So was that Scott that you said you've got audio and video? Are you guys just on the phone that you can't get the computer to work?
Well, we use a little phone deal here that always works good, but yeah, the computer hookup is not working.
Okay, I don't have any great suggestions for you other than to log off and try again.
Yeah, we'll just try it again, keep trying, but anyway.
All right.
We are here, though.
Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, hopefully you'll be able to jump on and see it. If not, we are recording it, and I'll send the video out later this morning. And then you could, really enjoy it later. So. All right. So yeah, I hope you guys have been enjoying the peer exchange. We've heard a lot of good feedback from you guys. We hope to continue to get feedback. a follow-up from last month. Wade reached out to BPI to find out if they would allow us to self-report for the peer exchange. BPI responded and said, yes, we can do that. And so basically, Wade will send you a certificate of participation, which you can use to self-report right after you submit to him your feedback from the peer exchange. So make sure you're filling out those forms, sending them into Wade. Obviously, this would pertain to the person who was out on the peer exchange. If you really need the time and really feel like you should get some credit for having someone come to you and participating in the peer exchange from that, in that regard, then work with Wade on that, and we may be able to get you some credit for that as well.
And I've been getting all your filled out checklists back. Just you'll need to send me an email if you want a certificate of completion for CEUs. Just remember to email me, and I will send that to you as long as I've got a filled out checklist from you. So.
Oh, thanks, Wade. Any questions on that from anybody? All right. The monthly production report, I'll show you what that looks like in a second. I sent out an email. Tech, the guys at the Energy Conservatory, the Tech Auto Test is now available on Android, so Nate Hunter, download it if you haven't already, and anybody else who needs that. If you're not familiar with that, what that is, if you have a Wi-Fi connected DG700 or DG1000, that Tech Auto Test, you can use that in place of instead of connecting your computer to run your blower door test. It will do it over Wi-Fi, and I actually prefer the recording. So it's now available on both Android and on Apple, just in the respective stores. And then also, as Tony pointed out, I appreciate you mentioning that, Tony, that the DG1000 does have an update. It's version like 1.3. I had some issues because of security settings at the state. I could not get my DG. It told me it was up to date, but if you looked at the versioning, it was still on version 1.1. So if you have any of those issues, take it to your home where you don't have a secured Wi-Fi, and then you can run the update, and it should work just fine. But either way, make sure you have update 1.3. One of the cool aspects of that is that there's a feature on there that will show you, if you'll select which test you're doing, it will show you how to hook up the hoses. So that's kind of cool. Field guide training. I don't remember what I was going to say there. And then our next technical meeting is May 1st. I
think on the field guide training, Matt, if I remember correctly from coordinators meeting, we had a discussion about maybe at each of these meetings.
Oh, that's right.
Going through a 15 or 20-minute
Yes.
dissertation on a section of the field guide that we feel is important.
Yeah, just exactly what Wade said. Probably beginning next month, we're going to start the first 10, 15 minutes of each of these. We'll actually just jump into the field guide, we'll read a section, and we'll talk about it. So be aware of that. That will help to ensure that each one of these will qualify for BBI CEUs as well. But I think it'll also be a good review just to keep us fresh on whatever subject comes up in the field guide as we go through it. So. All right, so...
And we may be even asking for readers to volunteer to read. So.
Yeah. The production, so here's production as of the end of the month. On the left-hand side, this shows whether or not we met our goal each month. And so as you can see, the program exceeded its goal for the month of March by 1 unit. But over here on the right, we are still behind overall because we had a few months where we fell behind. So overall, we are still down by 58 units, and we've got just this 1 quarter left, is that right? So we really, really appreciate all of your efforts in getting your monthly goals. We know that this is a focus for a lot of you, if not all of you, just encourage you to continue. Just do everything we can so that we can meet our production goal for the year. For those agencies who are at goal, anything you can do to exceed your goal a little bit, you might help out another agency. So we appreciate your efforts there. All right. The other thing before we jump in, so I really didn't mention this. Today's training topic is going to be a very quick overview of the changes that you guys need to be aware of to the health and safety plan. Before we jump into that, I wanted to take just 5 more minutes and talk about, I asked a month or 2 ago if you guys would look for opportunities to air seal some cantilevers. I got some feedback from a couple agencies, and so we just kind of wanted to share that with you guys right now. Jake, are you on the line?
I'm here.
All right. You're here, but you were hoping that you wouldn't have to talk. Is that right? So Housing Authority has been able to address some cantilevers on a couple of jobs. Jake, I only have pictures of this one job, but if you want to just share your results from any of the jobs you guys have addressed, and if you just want to take a couple minutes and talk about it.
Okay. You didn't get the other email I sent you yesterday?
I did get it.
Okay.
I ended up I was up in Logan until late, and so I didn't get a chance to put it together.
Okay. You there?
Yep. Yeah, go ahead. And I don't know if you want to review this one or just talk about other ones. This was one of the jobs that they did, and here's a little info about that. But go ahead, Jake. Tell us what you guys have been doing, how you've been sealing them up.
Yeah, so on this one, I was not able to do, we had done the 4 windows and the other air sealing before I did the final blower door. So that 580 is with, the other air sealing work done. The one we did in Springville, though, that one I was able to do. We had dropped the blower door like 60 CFM. We had just done a few weather strips and stuff, and then did the cantilever, and that one we actually got, I think, 350 CFM reduction on just doing the cantilever. So
Nice.
That was the other one that I sent you last night, or yesterday morning.
And so what have you guys been doing to air seal these cantilevers?
So just that outer rim joist on those, and then just leaving the inside ones open. Yeah, we just caulked that bottom side, and then like I was telling you yesterday, where it's at 7/16 thick, it just fits right in that channel. You know what I mean, to seal it up good.
So you guys are using, what is this material you're putting up here?
I think it's just hardy board is what it's called. So they have,
you're using like go ahead.
Yeah, they have a few different styles. Just the T111 siding's like $70 a sheet.
Gotcha.
And so we've been using this stuff that seems to work pretty good. We've done 3 of them now.
So Housing Authority's basically been taking down the aluminum soffit, doing some air sealing on this outer rim, and then putting up some T111 stuff, basically a rigid substrate that has some wood paneling looking stuff on the bottom of it, and then it's pre-primed, and that's your finished product, right?
Yep.
So, and this is a little blurb out of the field guide. Basically, if you are standing outside and you do a zonal on the cantilever, it says that the cantilever, like if you're air sealing at the bottom edge, then your cantilever should be completely inside. Basically, if your pressure boundary is right here down the front of the rim and then across the bottom, then you want your the zone, that cantilever, to be completely inside. So if you're standing outside, then you're looking for a reading of a -50 because you're depressurizing the house to -50 and you're standing outside. So um, so Jake conducted tests. That was how you set that up, right? And got these numbers?
Yep.
Is that accurate on this one? Yeah, so on this, they had on this one, their pre was a -14. The goal was to get to -50. They were able to move the needle to a -30. And then the rear, they were at a -30 and they moved the needle to a -42. So they got some decent improvement on air sealing just at this bottom surface. Is that right?
Yeah, and I figured both those would go to 50, so we're just got to figure out why it's not doing that. So.
And Jake, isn't having that kind of information, pre and post, all that stuff up front, is that not making your job easier?
Way easier.
Go and figure.
I mean, it was, where we hadn't done it before, it was a little scary digging into it, but I think we've got her down now, or getting close. So.
Good deal.
I really appreciate your efforts, and it's been fun just to talk with the guys at Housing Authority about the success they've had there. Our goal is to put together best practices. We're still looking for like the best ways to do this. I went up yesterday and spent the day with the guys from Bragg. This was a home in where the heck is that? It's at the mouth of Sardine Canyon. What's that little town called? Brigham City. Anyway, this one was really interesting because this was a home that was probably built in the early 80s, and there was no exterior OSB on the house. They stick framed the house, they put diagonal steel bracing on it, and then they wrapped the house with 1 inch of foam. So they were trying to be really, really energy efficient. And our pre-blower door was 4,800. And it was really hard to see anything with an IR camera because of aluminum siding and aluminum foil on the 1 inch foam. And anyway, it was kind of tricky, but zonals told us what was going on this house. We did zonals on this cantilever and found that it was at a 34, and the goal is a -50. And then we did zonals on the front cantilever, and the front cantilever was at a -4, which means that the front cantilever was completely outside already. We verified that the front cantilever, that there was no air sealing opportunity by just taking, it was a small cantilever, so we just took some of that duct tape, whatever we use up at the trains there. We just basically air sealed it really quickly, temporarily, and our blower door number didn't move at all. So we, from the zonal, we could see we didn't need to do anything on the front cantilever. On the back cantilever, the zonal was at a -34 with a goal of 50. So they ended up foaming the perimeter because we didn't have a good air barrier between the inch of foam and some of the framing members that were there. So they foamed that to air seal it, and then they actually, I apologize, I did not, for some reason I only have one picture of this, but we put 1.5 inches of rigid in between each of the framing members and then siliconed it and air sealed the bottom edge of this. And then they put the original aluminum siding or soffit right back up. And it ended up, other than Zach's fingerprints all over the place, it ended up looking nice and clean and pretty when we were done. And we stuck our hose back up in there, and our zonal went from a -34 to a -36. So we got like no improvement, but our blower door dropped 900 CFM. And we started scratching our heads, but then we went and looked at the work order that the auditor put together, and the next thing on the list, the auditor told us to get up in the attic and to seal up a big, huge bypass around the vent from the furnace. So the guys got up there, sealed that up, and we found, in the process, we found that the HVAC guys were using these trussed floors They're using the entire truss floor as an open cold air return throughout the whole house. Once we sealed up that plenum, and because we sealed this up, first off, the furnace stopped sucking air from the attic and from this cantilever, and that dropped the CFM another 1200, and then our zonal here actually went to a negative 46 or negative 47. So it was just, it was cool to see. But basically sealing this thing up, we got at least 900 CFM on it and a bunch from the attic. So please continue.
Using zonals and science actually works.
I don't know. Are any of the guys from Bragg on the line? Anybody that was out there yesterday? What did you guys think about the zonals on this?
Oh God, here we go. Yeah, we're here.
You're here. You guys drinking the Kool-Aid? Did you believe in zonals?
Yeah, it was pretty cool to see it work and put it together actually out on the job yesterday.
Yeah.
Did it help you become more efficient, do you think, at doing your job?
I think it'll help us pinpoint where our problem areas are as far as air sealing goes.
And do you feel like that'll allow you to offer a better product to the customer?
Yes.
Sorry, client, not customer.
Yes.
Thank you.
I thought it was nice that we were able to figure out that it was not worthwhile to take apart the front cantilever because it was already basically there was no communication from the inside of the house to the outside. So there really wasn't a huge opportunity to correct anything there.
So again, using science helped make you decisions that were the right decisions to make, right?
Mm-hmm. Also, we were doing pressure pans on our ductwork because this ductwork is out in the cantilevers, which technically, if this floor is the pressure boundary, then this ductwork is outside of the envelope. And by moving the pressure boundary down here, we brought all of the ductwork inside the envelope. We were finding readings, pressure pan readings at 5 and 6 Pascal, and every one of them should be below a 1. Once we sealed this up, our pressure pan readings dropped to like a 3 or a 2, but it was like, well, we still have some issues. But then as soon as we sealed up the stuff in the attic, because the duct system was tied into the entire floor, then everything dropped down below a 1. So basically we knew there was some duct leakage, but it was that their cold air return was sucking air from the attic. So anyway, please continue. So Housing Authority was just putting some T111 on the bottom and using that substrate as their air barrier. Bragg used 1.5 inches of rigid foam and then siliconed around it. I honestly don't. I think both of them work great. I'm looking for more information from you guys. So if you haven't started doing this, please look for opportunities. If any other agency, as you guys find opportunities, if you'll give me a day or two's notice, I'd love to come and just hang out and help in any way, but mainly take photos and help measure some stuff and see how we're doing. Because my goal is to basically get some good best practices. We'll get them written down and in the field guide so that we have a good standard to follow. So thank you guys, those of you who are trying this, and encourage you, those of you who have not yet tried it, to give it a try. So
yeah, thanks guys. All you that have been implementing this stuff, thank you very much.
This is what we're trying to avoid, is to stop dumping energy out of those cantilevers. So. Okay, so the health and safety plan changes. I am going to go through this as quickly as I can. This will be the first of, you'll have a couple other opportunities to receive health and safety training. This is going to be like a very quick overview. I'm going to cover a ton of things, and we'll get through this, and you'll probably have 100 questions. If we have some time at the end, I will answer questions, so just write them down, but let me just kind of plow through this so that anybody who's on the line that needs to jump off at 9 o'clock can do so. And then know probably it may, I can't remember if we were thinking it was going to have to wait until August or something, but we are going to have some additional training on this health and safety plan because there's a lot to it. With that said, there's really not, there are a bunch of little teeny changes, but for the most part, the health and safety plan is pretty much what you've been doing. And what we did, DOE put out some new guidance, and they said basically when you submit your plan this year, you've got to make sure that your health and safety section of the plan is aligned with our new guidance. And so with their new guidance, they handed out a new template. And they basically said if you'd use this template, it would help us because they have to review all of these plans for all of the states, and it becomes very cumbersome. So we took our existing health and safety plan, and I basically just kind of cut and pasted into their template. So everything got moved around, but it was all, like all the pieces are still there. So the plan looks totally different, but really most of the stuff in there is just exactly what we had before. What I did was I went through and I think I sent out a copy of this, just this PDF, and I just tried to highlight all of the changes. The changes are in green, and there's a few things I highlighted in yellow that are basically, they really weren't a change, but they are some things to bear in mind or to think about how the changes impact that. So anyway, I hope this will be a good resource to you guys until we actually put this new draft up on our website. So if you haven't already done this, I encourage you to take some time and skim through this document, read at least the stuff highlighted in green, and think about how it applies. I'm going to go through a couple of things because basically we've said, okay, DOE, here's our new plan, and on July 1 we will be following this plan. And there's a handful of things that you really need to start following right now so that you will be, fully implementing them by July 1. So you can, auditors, QCIs, everybody, you can start using this guidance and following it. We are waiting to hear back from DOE, but it sounds like they have reviewed some of this stuff, and so far they haven't had any issues with it. If they do have any, then we'll talk about that and address it so that we don't veer too far off the track. But basically, per Brad, you can go ahead and start using this stuff right now and implementing it. It will be required as of July 1. Okay, I got a bunch of slides. Hopefully we can get through this stuff without me getting too hung up on things. There were three kind of foundational principles, or three pieces of a puzzle that I want to make sure everybody clearly understands. And it's these three pieces. So I've tried to, everything I'm going to talk about, I've tried to at least have the reference next to it, but I'm going to jump around through the guidelines a little bit. So this is recorded, so if you need to come back to it, or if you just need to make a note as you're going through it, if you're trying to figure out what the heck I'm talking about, the reference should be there on most of this stuff. So there's these three pieces that are peppered in the guidelines, but when you put them all together and really think about them, it becomes a little more complex, and I've got a slide or two to show you what that will look like in your world, I hope. So principle number one is that no health and safety measures can be performed in a home unless ECMs, energy conservation measures, are also part of the scope of work. So this one, it was interesting, and all of this language is language that DOE's new guidance was really, really clear and very, very specific on some certain things. I really like it because they've clarified their stance on a lot of things, but basically I took their words, their terminology, and pretty much just put them right into our guidelines wherever they were most appropriate. And this was one of them.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Matt. Hey, so the HSMs, are we basically going to tie them into an ECM like an IRM?
Yes. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so DOE said, first and foremost, you can't you can't do any health and safety measures if there's not an ECM there, because if there's not, if you don't have an energy conservation measure, you're not doing weatherization. If your audit, and I've never run into it, but if you think about the principle, your audit should at least have one or more energy conservation measure, or you're really not, you can't call it weatherization. Now we run two programs. We have a crisis program and a weatherization program, and so, you know, if you have had a situation like that, you could just simply treat the home as a crisis job. But be aware that the state, DOE gave us a choice, and we chose that we were going to have a separate health and safety budget, and that we were going to account for all of our health and safety measures separately. The other option DOE gives us is more complicated, and it's not worth the effort. And that's pretty much what every state does. We all just budget our health and safety measures separate. So we have to keep them separate. We have to call them health and safety measures. DOE says no health and safety measures without ECMs.
So Matt, another question for you. What are you going to tie the fan to then?
I'll show you a couple examples in a second.
Okay, all right.
So principle number 2 says the rationale for performing each health and safety measure in an individual home and its relationship to the energy conservation measure that necessitated it must be clearly documented in the client file. This is what Tony's talking about. Exactly what we were doing with an incidental repair measure. You have to make a connection between every health and safety measure and an energy conservation measure, the energy conservation measure that necessitated it. And then I'll get to the second comment from Tony in a second, because that, you know, leaves some unanswered questions here. The third part of this is, it says each client file must include documentation that separates all costs into their appropriate budget category, including health and safety. So you got to keep these health and safety measures separate. We have to account for them separately. And when you're all done closing out the file, you have to document all that separately. And we have to show that each health and safety measure was necessitated by an energy conservation measure. And it gets even more complex than that, because as we started piecing this together, we realized that DOE was basically saying, if you don't have a specific DOE measure, energy conservation measure that you can tie your health and safety measure to, then you can't use DOE's money to pay for health and safety. So here's this example really quick. We have an energy conservation measure that we paid for with DOE's money. And we have a health and safety measure that was necessitated by the energy conservation measure. So we can draw a straight line between them. How do we pay for it? Well, it's a DOE measure. You can either pay for it with DOE money, or you could pay for it with LIHEAP, health and safety. Both of these are DOE health and safety or LIHEAP health and safety. But the opposite does not work. If you have a LIHEAP, an energy conservation measure that you pay for with LIHEAP money, you cannot use DOE money to pay for the health and safety aspect of that. You can only use LIHEAP. We had to ask our project officer about this, so the question we asked him was, if the energy conservation measure that triggers the health and safety measure was funded by non-DOE funds, could we still use DOE health and safety funds? The answer was no. And then he said a best practice is basically just use your LIHEAP funds to pay for all of your health and safety. Now, each of your programs, you have a budget for DOE and LIHEAP, and I'm not actually sure what Brad would recommend that you do as far as if he wants you to stick with those budgets. One strategy is that you use your LIHEAP and your DOE goes back to program at some point in time, or basically if you're keeping good track of which energy conservation measures trigger what, then just make sure you're spending DOE and DOE together so that you don't have this issue. But it gets a little complex, which kind of, I don't know. But if your agency's already organized and taking care of all this stuff on your closeout, then hopefully this is not a big lift for you. But I know there's some agencies out there this could be some issues. And if you have some issues, reach out to us. We'll work with you and help you get your agency ready to be in compliance with this stuff.
I don't think you want to buy all your ASHRAE stuff with LIHEAP funds.
Yeah, and that's, as there's going to be some issues with all that stuff. So yeah, you know, anyway, this just adds a complexity. Along these lines, I grabbed, so Ian did a presentation for us a couple months ago and showed us how to use the, I can't even remember the name of this report. Is it the cost summary report, or is that just the title of this page? Anyway, Ian's been using this closeout report that is in the audit, and it does a ton of cool things. One of the things that it does, it'll help you keep all of this straight. So, because basically you can identify which funding source. So if you have a health and safety measure, you know, you'd be able to have documented that this health and safety measure was paid for with LIHEAP. So it's an ASHRAE fan. It was paid for with LIHEAP. So, and then I apologize. I guess I better go through this screen here, or I'm going to get ahead of myself. So Tony asked, you know, what do we tie the ASHRAE fan to? So here's an example of a couple of things where basically, so the principle is that the rationale for performing each health and safety measure in an individual home and its relationship to the ECM that necessitated it must be clearly documented in the client file. So we treat it just the way we've been treating an incidental repair measure. You just make this rationale in the comment section of each measure. And it's going to include words like because or required or something like that. So an example was, here's a health and safety measure to do lead RRP on some windows. So it says conduct lead RRP on windows 4 and 7 because testing found lead will be disturbed during the installation of the ECM windows. So was the rationale for performing this health and safety measure and a connection to the ECM that necessitated it documented here? Yeah, we've got everything that they're asking for just written in one quick sentence. The next one, install smoke detectors. So install two smoke alarms, one in each basement bedroom, required to be installed because there was one or more ECMs. So I've written in the guidelines. I don't anticipate anything from DOE, but if they had an issue, they have an opportunity to say, hey, we don't like this. But in the guidelines I wrote that you do not have to draw that line directly to an ECM for smoke, CO, ASHRAE fans, and for vapor barriers, those 4 things. So, but you still have to basically write down the reason why it was required. So basically you can just write this statement that you did the other test, which was you have to have 1 or more ECMs. So this was required to be installed, and there was 1 or more ECMs. Improper venting for bathroom exhaust fan. So the example here was we were going to actually use this for our ASHRAE local exhaust, and in order to comply with ASHRAE local exhaust, it has to vent to the outside, and there was 1 or more ECMs. So I just simply explained, you know, needs to be vented to the outside so that fan could be included in the ASHRAE local exhaust calc, and there was 1 or more ECMs.
Hey, Matt,
yes.
One more question. If you're paying for something with Dominion funds, how, you know, and you would typically use either a LIHEAP or a DOE health and safety to pay for part of that because you have to do that other work, how are you going to take care of that now?
If you have a energy conservation measure and there is no DOE money in it, you cannot use DOE health and safety to pay for a health and safety measure. It was
Well, what I'm saying is like, so like you pay for a first with Dominion, right?
And it triggered some health and safety?
Right. How do you
You cover that with Dominion also.
All right.
Anything that's a non-audited measure and it has an associated health and safety, that the cost of that health and safety measure has to be included in the non-audited measure. Or if you got down the road and realized, oh, we've got, you know, we're working on this Dominion furnace and now it's triggered another health and safety measure, your auditor can go ahead and write another non-audited measure and just make sure you're paying for it with the same funding source.
So these, we're not gonna tie these in like an IRM, like SIR wise, are we?
No, yeah, you do not ever include your health and safety in the cumulative SIR. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, it's just simply that
Yeah.
there has to be a connection, and that's basically the connection is going to be, auditors are going to document the connection here on the audit, and then this is a good example on the closeout report. So here's some low E windows, and they were paid for with DOE program, and they had a health and safety measure that was tied to it, and that health and safety measure was also paid for with DOE. So that's what this has to look like if you're using DOE for stuff. And you should be following that general practice with other funding, but you know, if you had LIHEAP and you paid for health and safety measure with DOE, that's okay too. But anyway, I'm sure we'll have more questions about that. I'm going to move on to some other stuff, but you know, as you digest that, as you have questions, you feel free to send them to me. Let me kind of just jump into some other stuff that you need to be aware of and think about how we need to implement it. Section 3 of the Health and Safety Plan, it talks about expenditure limits. Basically, DOE says you need to put a cap on how much people can spend on health and safety measures, because we don't, you know, and then just tell us what your cap is. And you need to have some reasonable way to calculate that. So what we did was Brad just came up with this average cost per unit last year. So this part is actually not new, but the number is new. That number gets updated every year. So basically, we just said, how much did everybody spend on health and safety stuff last year? How many units did we do? What's the average cost of health and safety per unit? And that turned out to be $1,081. And so any individual health and safety measure that you do on a home, it cannot exceed $1,081, with the exception of a direct vent water heater that you're, and on that you're, gosh, I've got something covering up my screen so I can't read it. Anyway, the direct vent water heater, you're limited to $1,600. That's a number the state came up with. When we start bumping up against $1,600 for direct vent water heaters, then we can talk about it and we can move that number up. But other than that, every other health and safety measure that you guys are doing has to be less than $1,081. If it ever goes over that and you still feel like it's a legitimate health and safety measure, then you can reach out to the state, but it's now called a major repair. So we have a minor and a major repair. Minor repairs are basically anything that does not exceed the average health and safety cost per unit, that $1,081. If it becomes a major repair, then you have to get approval from the state, and then here's the caveat that major repairs other than water heater replacement require state approval. So that one's that. Under this same section, under use of funds, DOE basically said sometimes there are going to be some health and safety measures that would also meet the definition of an energy conservation measure. Like you're doing something and it could be a health and safety measure or an energy conservation measure. DOE says you always default to the energy conservation measure. So when a measure can be cost justified, it must first be treated as an energy conservation measure. And then if it can't be, so if you ran it didn't have an SIR or had an SIR below a 1, then you would address it as a health and safety measure. So they're just basically saying don't just dump everything into the health and safety pile, if it would be a legitimate energy conservation measure first. The next thing is these incidental repairs. So if you look in our guidelines right now, there's a table in there and it has examples of things that, could be an incidental repair and they could be a health and safety measure. And there's a few of them that, like, you could do a roof repair under either one. Like there's a handful of things that we do in our program that would meet the definition of a health and safety measure or an incidental repair measure. DOE says, down here at the bottom, DOE requires the specific treatment of measures to be applied consistently throughout the state, and therefore they will not allow the decision to charge these measures as HSM or IRM to be made in the field. Basically, DOE said the state has to decide what's going to be a health and safety measure and what's going to be an incidental repair. So whenever we have an issue that meets both definitions, what I decided to do was just do what you guys were already doing. All of the audits that I was monitoring, I based this off of last year's stuff, and all of the stuff last year, there was not a single instance where there was an incidental repair written up that could have also been a health and safety, at least not that I can recall. Basically, everybody was just writing them up as health and safety. So since everybody was already defaulting to health and safety, we told DOE that anytime we have a situation where it could be either IRM or HSM, it's always just going to be a health and safety measure with one exception, and that would be knob and tube. Knob and tube will always be written up as an incidental repair. I like this because the knob and tube, the incidental repair and including it in the cumulative SIR, it basically limits how much knob and tube mitigation we can do based on the amount of energy saving there is on the whole project. So that's how the audit keeps the cost of knob and tube in check. But with every other thing that could be both, you're going to just do that as a health and safety measure. Now, that doesn't
Hey, Matt,
mean,
one thing on that.
yes,
Just make sure everybody knows that it can be an AM using crisis funds also.
yes, absolutely. And also, like, this doesn't get rid of incidental repairs. There's still a handful of other things that are legitimate incidental repairs. They just don't meet the definition of a health and safety measure. So we're really only talking about things that meet both of the definitions, and DOE just says you got to pick one or the other. And we could have got more complex. We just figured we'd keep it easy and do it that way. So along these same lines, there's a couple of places in the guidelines where we allow you guys to do something as a health and safety measure, but we needed to scope it. And because these things are no longer incidental repairs, we needed some way to kind of rein it in. So we just talked about knob and tube. So knob and tube, you're going to do it as an incidental repair measure. But if there are other electrical health and safety repairs, first off, you're limited by the average cost per unit, so you have to stay under the $1,081, and that number will go up each year. But also, if the repairs are preventing, so if you ran into an issue with electrical where it's like this is going to be really expensive, so it's over the $1,081. And so you start going, well, if I can't do this repair, just like an incidental repair, you have to kind of start going, well, I can't do this energy conservation measure because I can't do this repair. If you get in a situation where not being able to do those repairs prevents you from, it basically drops your energy savings by more than 15 MMBTUs, then you should defer the entire job and work with the client to find a different funding source to identify the problem. This is going to be an anomaly. This is going to be rare. If you've got a couple of options there. You could ask the state for permission, or you could look to your other current funding sources. But anyway, we just had to put some parameters on it. The other place we put this MMBTU, the 15 MMBTU limit, was on injury prevention. If a handrail is missing, or if the cover to a power panel is missing, you can do health and safety repairs so that your guys don't get hurt while they're on the job. If you ever had something that was so expensive and you couldn't do it, and it started, you had to start deleting energy conservation measures from the list. Again, if you went above 15 MMBTUs, then you should be deferring the whole job. Health and safety inspection, identification, and notification. So this part is not new. We've always been required to do an inspection, and we've always been required to identify health and safety issues. DOE has gotten very, very, very prescriptive about notification. We have to document everything we find, and we have to communicate that to the client. Just bear that in mind, and I've got a kind of a list of things on the next slide to go through. But basically the client, the landlord, the property manager, whoever's appropriate, must be informed of in writing of all testing results. Now I tried to more clearly understand what they mean by testing results. And basically my interpretation of that is that it's lead tests, it's asbestos tests, it's radon tests. It's some of those things that are very technical tests. It's not necessarily that, if you were testing to see if there was insulation in the wall, you don't have to do that. But it's these health and safety associated tests that are kind of more technical aspects of what we do. So be aware of that. I'll kind of go through a list in a second of how that applies. And then the other thing to be aware of, just throughout the guidelines, we have implemented the BPI 1200 standard. So when you're doing your health and safety inspection, that standard is used. It applies mainly when you get the combustion stuff, but be aware that that is now officially on the table. And then because everything has to be documented, just a reminder to use your health and safety checklist. One of the things that says health and safety notification form, this form has to have a clear description of any problems, a statement indicating if or when weatherization can continue, and it must be signed by the auditor and by the client. So the clear description of problems, you're writing the clear description and clients and agency responsibilities. So nothing new. We've already been doing this, but this is just, here's the connection. This is the DOE requirement that says we have to fill this out and get the client's signature on it. So make sure you're doing that properly. This occupational health risk evaluation, this one was not really a change. It was a good clarification. I did not understand this aspect of what DOE wanted us to do until this new guidance came out. So this says auditors must inform clients of the aspects of weatherization that may put a client with a pre-existing health condition at risk during weatherization. And you have to identify steps that will be taken by the client and or weatherization so that we won't aggravate the pre-existing health conditions. And then I liked DOE's explanation, so I dropped it right in our guidelines. This is what DOE says. It says agencies should not solicit specific health conditions from clients, but should inform the client how certain aspects of weatherization may affect them if they have certain medical conditions. Agencies are expected to explain to the client, Mrs. Jones, we'll be doing X, Y, and Z to your home. Part of this work may generate a lot of dust during installation. If you or any other residents have health conditions that would put them at risk during this work, let's talk about precautions we can take to avoid that risk. That's all we're doing. It's just we have to have that conversation, and we're documenting it. We're doing that with the health and safety assessment and also the client evaluation. So look at those the client eval especially, and then you're going to be documenting any of these aspects on the health and safety checklist. Life-threatening hazards. There are some situations that could require an immediate response. In our program, we have typically been taking care of these with crisis because DOE has other states, other grantees that get money from them that don't have crisis to deal with. DOE had to make a way possible for them to deal with immediate life-threatening issues. We have, because it's a possibility, we have opened the door and we've said you can use health and safety money to do that. You'll want to read through this section very closely if you ever do that. I'd say stick with your crisis and keep doing that, but if you ever ran into an issue where you couldn't use crisis on a job, there is an opportunity to deal with the life-threatening hazards. The main takeaway, whether you use DOE money or crisis, is that if you encounter a life-threatening hazard, you have to deal with it immediately. So if the repair or replacement is within the scope of weatherization, agency must return and repair the issue as soon as possible. So just be aware of that, but DOE just got very clear and prescriptive. So I just went through kind of the highlights of the first 6 sections of the new health and safety plan. There's 7 sections. We just went through the first 6. The last one is basically the table of issues. So the old table, as you know it, goes away. And the new table it's no longer an attachment. The new table is just included in the guidelines. It's just section 7. And all it is it's a list of all the health and safety measures that we can address. But I followed DOE's format, and so instead of having like this prescriptive list of like all these little things, it just says, here's combustion gases. So, and then when you get to the combustion gases section, you can read about the venting, the combustion air, and all of the things that you can address, with health and safety funds. But so you'll want to familiarize yourself with this list so you find things quickly. But know that I went through all of our, this is our list of usual suspects. These are the things that we typically do the most in weatherization. And all of these things land somewhere in this list. So the new table of issues covers everything you used to be able to do. It might take you a little bit of time to find out where they're at. It's in alphabetical order. The first one is air conditioning and heating systems. So if you're wondering where the heck the HVAC stuff is, it's right at the top. There's 3 sections on asbestos, and then I'll kind of hit some of the highlights on some of these other things real quickly as I go through it. Note that under each one of these sections, so for like building structure and roofing, or this one that I'm going to pull up is window whatever, there's 4 subsections under each one. The first section is action and allowability, the second one's testing, client ed, and then training. So for each one of those you can go see what's allowed, what testing is required, what client ed am I required to do, and what training is required. So here's just the breakdown. At the beginning of section 7, this general description of those headings is in there. So it says under action allowability, if an action or measure is listed under this section as required or allowable, it is an approved health and safety measure. So if you're wondering if something is allowable, if you can find it in section 1 under one of those things, then it's allowable. Under section 2, it has a list of things testing that must be performed when an issue exists. Keep that in mind. You don't have to conduct all of these tests all the time. It's only, some of them are only when an issue exists. There's a ton of client ed, and again, client ed is when an issue exists. There's some things you don't have to educate the client on if there is no issue. And then training, there's just a list of all the training. I'm going to kind of skip that right now. Just familiarize yourselves with that. Under asbestos, there's 3 sections. And I wanted to just point out a couple of things you'll want to be aware of with asbestos. I am bumping up against 9 o'clock. I think I have about 10 minutes more stuff, but if anybody needs to drop off, feel free to drop off. I'll just keep going until I get done, and then we'll take a few questions at the end. So there's 3 different sections on asbestos. Asbestos, you've got asbestos that would be in sidings, walls, ceilings. There's asbestos in vermiculite, and then asbestos on pipes, furnaces, or other small covered surfaces. DOE broke them into these 3 groups because we treat them all differently. The asbestos in sidings, walls, and ceilings, basically, we don't abate asbestos in siding, walls, or ceilings. This is not new. I just wanted to highlight it. You can pull siding off and do a closed blow behind it, as long as you can do that without breaking up the asbestos or suspected asbestos tiles. But if you suspect there's asbestos, we don't allow you to pay for testing on that. Asbestos in vermiculite, this one's new. So sample collection and testing of vermiculite is now an allowable health and safety expense. But it must be conducted by a certified tester. So that's why I pointed out that the U of U is doing asbestos certified tester class in like June or something of this year. If your agency feels like they want to have somebody doing that, you'll want to look into that. And I'm going to throw Ian's name out there. I know they have one, so if you have questions about it, you could also reach out to Ian to find out if you want to do that. So, so testing is allowed only in vermiculite. Encapsulation and removal of vermiculite that has asbestos in it is not allowable. If you had testing done and you found that there was no asbestos in the vermiculite in the attic, you can blow insulation on top of it. You can encapsulate that because there's no asbestos in there. But anything that has asbestos in it, you cannot encapsulate it, you cannot remove it. Also, when asbestos-containing material is found, the agency must instruct the client in writing not to disturb it, and you have to provide them with client safety information. When it comes to asbestos on pipes and furnaces and other small covered surfaces, encapsulation is allowed well, first off, you've got to read through all the specifics. Most of the stuff you guys are going to run into on an HVAC system is going to fall below the regulated levels, and you can encapsulate that as a health and safety measure with some mastic. But if you get above that and it actually is a regulated asbestos, then again, encapsulation is allowed, but it has to be done by an appropriately trained asbestos control professional. So anyway, so you can't test for asbestos, but you can encapsulate some of the stuff on the ducts. You cannot encapsulate vermiculite, but you can test for it. And then on the exterior siding, you don't do either one of them. So, and then this last thing, this is written in all three of these sections, but it basically says that if the client tries to have any asbestos remediated, then the occupant must provide documentation that a certified professional performed the remediation before we can continue the work. DOE spelled that out. DOE says you cannot go back to a house just because the client says, well, all the vermiculite's gone now. You can't go work in there unless they can provide documentation that a certified professional took care of it. So lead-based paint, the big change on that is really not a change at all. It's that we just got rid of any of the language that included. DOE made their own little program called Lead Safe, and they've said, no, let's get rid of that and let's just follow the EPA's RRP rule. So we just follow EPA's RRP rule 100%. At the end of this section, there's a couple of little things that are best practices that aren't really included in the RRP, and we've listed them there, and we've listed them in the field guide. But basically, we just got rid of the language. Nothing really changes. I feel like we've already put everything in practice. So, speaking of asbestos, I think my slide was out of order here. There's DOE said, when you find asbestos in a house, what is your policy on your blower door? Like, what are you guys going to do? So this is our state's blower door policy. It says, do not perform blower door depressurization tests in homes where there's a risk of asbestos becoming airborne and being drawn into the dwelling, or where there are other circumstances where the blower door test could cause health or safety problems. So auditors, if you feel like performing a blower door would cause health or safety issues, would cause asbestos to become airborne, you do not have to do a depressurization test. And I think I have a caveat for just testing in general too. So step number 1 says agencies shall perform positive pressure blower door tests in homes where suspected asbestos-containing material is present, and the agency sees no potential that ACM could be introduced into the home. So again, you should be doing a positive pressure as long as you feel like it's still safe. If a blower door testing is not conducted, then the agency shall document in the audit the reasons for not testing, including the indicators that the risk of the asbestos being drawn into the dwelling. So basically, if you don't do a test, write down the reason why you didn't do it. And then if you have a home where you can't conduct a blower door test, then we wrote this clause in. On homes where no blower door testing was conducted, duct sealing and infiltration reduction shall be performed as one combined non-audited measure, and the total cost shall be limited to $500. And it shall follow the air sealing prioritization guidance in B98KI3. So if you can't do a blower door test, you can do all of your duct sealing and all of your air sealing combined as one measure, and you're limited to $500. There's a couple of instances where we felt like we didn't want agencies spending $1,081 on stuff. So we put a limit, and even this limit is high, but we wanted to just stick with a number that would be easy to remember. So if you came across biologicals or unsanitary conditions or pests, you can spend up to $100 in materials and labor. So that's like just a couple bottles of wasp spray and, you know, just a little bit of minor cleanup of unsanitary conditions if you choose to. You can address that, but you're limited to $100. Pre-existing conditions. So DOE kind of, their guidance alluded to, well, it more than alluded to. Their guidance allows us to address pre-existing conditions. They did not use the word pre-existing. I put it into our guidance, and I'm hoping when we get this back, they will have not had any issues with it. But I felt like this is really what it is, pre-existing conditions. There's a couple of things we run into that they're pre-existing conditions, but if we don't fix them, we can't effectively weatherize the house. And so DOE says it's okay to deal with those. One of them is sometimes there are some pre-existing code compliance stuff. So it says when correction of pre-existing code compliance issues is triggered and paid for with WAP funds, the auditor must cite on the audit the specific code requirement with reference to the weatherization measure that triggered the code compliance issue. So you got to make sure and really document that one well, but you can address that with health and safety funds if you need to. Again, back to what Ian said, there's a lot of these things you can address with crisis as well. So keep that in mind. This just allows us a little more flexibility to address stuff with health and safety as well. Combustion gases, you can address pre-existing venting and combustion air issues. That's allowable as a health and safety measure when the issue will be exacerbated by weatherization and there's one or more ECM that's part of the scope of work. So you can address pre-existing stuff. I think we've already been doing this. Sometimes we've just felt like it was a little gray area from time to time. And then fuel leaks, addressing a pre-existing fuel leak is an allowable HSM. And there's basically the DOE differentiated between the client side of the meter and the utility side of the meter. If it's on the utility side of the meter, the utility needs to address it. If it's on the client side, you need to address it. If it's on the utility side, yeah, call the utility. I can't think of any instance where we would address that, even though we have Dominion funds. But anyway, just DOE made a clear delineation between that. So other documentation requirements. So these are just kind of I'm kind of jumping around here, but there was some documentation requirements you guys need to be aware of. Combustion gases, when a combustion appliance is replaced as a health and safety measure, the agency must maintain documentation justifying the replacement with a cost comparison between the replacement and the repair in the client file. So there's a lot more to this. You'll want to read the whole section, but you know, if you ever did that, you've got to document it and justify it in the file and maintain that. Most of this should just be done on the audit, but if you ever have to have extra documentation, you know, just keep it in the client file. Hazardous material disposal. Agencies must maintain all documentation required by local laws, regulations, or federal guidelines. And then this other one, documentation requirement, is that language requiring proper disposal requirements and documentation must be in the contract language with any of your subcontractors. So if you guys have subcontractors, you need to make sure it's in your language as well. And I think we at the state have to make sure this is in our language with you. So be aware of that. Make sure it's in your contracts. Lead-based paint, documentation in the client file must include all the stuff we've been doing. The one new clarification is that they want photos of site and the containment setups. So actually field guys, make sure that these photos are being taken care of, being addressed by your production supervisors, or if your agency doesn't have a good person already in place for that, you need to make sure that that is assigned so that we get photos of all of our containments. Radon, this was the interesting one. I think I have one more slide after this and then I'm done. So DOE is starting to talk about radon, and we now have to do a couple of things. We have to give all of our clients the Citizen's Guide to Radon, and we have to have them all, every single one of them has to sign a radon informed consent form. There's some language, you can take the language and put it into any of your existing forms. I will probably be working to put all of our required language into one form so we could just get lead and radon asbestos and all of that in one signature. But basically, we have to let the client know that what we're doing could actually increase radon in their home, and we have to educate them about it, is the gist of this. So a couple of things to note. We do not do radon mitigation. It is not allowed. Clients have to sign the informed consent thing, and we have to keep that in the client file. Radon precautionary measures. So DOE said any homes in these specific zones have to do this. Since our entire state is either in zone 1 or 2, then our work scope should always include precautionary measures, which I said are listed below, but then I cut that out. But they're based on the EPA indoor environmental protocol for home energy upgrades to reduce radon. Basically what it is we have to put vapor barriers down on anything that, any exposed dirt or positive pressure ASHRAE. The only thing that was really outside of what we already do was if you ever come across a sump pump, you've got to do something with it. I don't remember what it is. I don't know how you radon proof your sump pump. It's listed in this section though, under radon, whatever it was. So everything else we're already doing, we're already addressing it. We already do vapor barriers in our crawl spaces, and if we can't do vapor barriers, we do positive pressure ASHRAE, so, or neutral. And then this was one other caveat we threw in there. Radon testing is allowed on a case-by-case basis with written permission from the state. So we don't test for radon. If you ever ran into a really weird situation and you felt like it needed a radon test, you can reach out to us and talk to us about it. We might give you permission. And then I already addressed these two things down here. So that's radon. I think we have a lot more to learn about that. But that's it in a quick nutshell. The last thing is just this client education. I went through the whole, there's a section on client ed on everything. I just went through and grabbed everything that I had highlighted just to show you guys we have to, one of the main things that I felt like was a big change was DOE is specifically requiring documentation on a ton of stuff. So from the HVAC section, it said you have to provide paperwork and manuals on anything installed. And that's also in the section on CO and smoke. So basically any new appliance, your ASHRAE fans, all that stuff, you need to hand the manuals to the clients. Where combustion equipment is present, you have to provide safety information, including how to recognize depressurization. I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's what DOE is requiring. Inform the client in writing when suspected asbestos-containing materials are present and what precautions to be taken. When suspected ACM is found, agency must instruct clients in writing not to disturb it. You must formally notify the client in writing if testing was performed on asbestos or lead. You have to let them know what the results of the lead test was. Provide information on how to maintain a sanitary home if you find unsanitary conditions. Notifying the client in writing of structurally compromised areas if you find any. Inform the client any observed code compliance issues when it results in deferral. Provide client with combustion safety hazard information. Electrical issues or cause of deferral, you have to provide them overcurrent education, overloading circuits, and basically electrical safety. If conditions cannot be repaired, inform the client of observed hazards associated with any other general, these are just general risks, mold. You have to provide the agency with a point of contact. This came from the section on if you have a plan to, if they have asthma or other health-related issues, you have to give them your point of contact info in case they have any concerns or issues. And then ASHRAE, you have to include a disclaimer that ASHRAE does not account for high polluting sources. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. I think we cover most of this already in our client ed stuff, the materials we give our clients, but we're going to have to review all of that and make sure that it is all in line. And you're going to need to start adding that radon consent form. And then I think everything else is just be aware of it and start doing it. So sorry, that was a ton of stuff, and there's, we'll go through it in detail at later dates, but anybody have any questions that are just bugging them right now they want to talk about real quick? Nothing? All right, well, I, again, apologize I went through that really quickly. Thank you for listening to me drone on. I hope you got something useful out of this. I will send out a certificate for you can self-report this as a CEU. And if you have any questions that come up, send me an email. I'd love to help you with them. Other than that, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you guys for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, y'all.
I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.